Hi all. I'm Nick Shiner. I am Nick Shiner, director. My name is Nick Shiner. I'm the director of peer-to-peer professional learning at Digital Promise and one of this year's festival's curators. Our upcoming session is a panel moderated by Makeda Mays Green, Senior Vice President of Digital and Cultural Consumer Insights at Nickelodeon. Makeda will be speaking with Melanie Harke, Corinne, Tiffany Leonis, and Phil Birchinall. The panel will share the secrets behind creating awesome apps and games that not only entertain but educate our youngest learners, highlighting the magic of collaboration and the incredible work that happens at organizations like PBS Kids, Fred Rogers Productions, Discovery Education, and Digital Promise. We can expect to gain insights into the process of developing and publishing digital content that makes a positive impact on young minds. Folks, I introduce you to our panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Wow. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, that's a better.
Yeah, go.
We are so happy to be here today. First of all, I want to say this is my first Games for Change festival, and I want to start by giving a shout out to Susanna Pollock and the entire Games for Change festival team, because they are so committed to the mission and the movement, and without them, we would not be here. So please give them a warm round of applause. I also want to say that you are in for a real treat today. We have assembled some of the best and brightest minds in the industry to talk to you about Pixel Playtime. This is a group of individuals who are committed to creating change, breaking barriers, driving engagement, and building community. Unbeknownst to them, I refer to them in my head as the superhero squad of Play for Purpose. Really excited to dive in. I'm going to hand this over to them because they're going to do a brief intro of who they are and tell you a little bit about their line of work before we dive more specifically into questions. So we will begin with you, Tiffany.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm here at my first Games for Change festival, so I'm excited to be here with you all. I'm an early STEM researcher at Digital Promise, and it's a global nonprofit working to expand opportunities for every learner. And so we work with educators, researchers, technology leaders, and communities to design, investigate, and scale innovations for learners, especially those who have been historically and systematically excluded. And in my role specifically, I'm in the early learning space, and so that means I get to collaborate with our wonderful preschool educators and families to co-create hands-on and digital STEM learning experiences such as early science with Nico and Norm. Yes. And I'll pass it over to Melanie.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm very happy to be here. Whoop. All right, there's my slide. There we go. I'm Melanie Harke. I'm the interactive producer at Fred Rogers Productions for Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood and Don Quixote. And we are a company, I'm sure some of you might have heard of Mr. Rogers. We are the production company for Mr. Rogers. We also make Daniel Tiger, Don Quixote, Almost Way, Upquad, and many others. And I focused on making interactive content for preschoolers. That's where a lot of my work is at.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Phil Birchinall. I work for Discovery Education. I'm Senior Director of Immersive Learning, Immersive Content. And our role really is to transform content in this world of games-based education, finally getting some traction in the classroom, gamification being taken seriously, and this whole thing of immersive. What is immersive? And what does that mean when students and teachers, everyone, encounter something that makes you feel something? That's what immersion is all about. And so you're looking at Time Pod Adventures there, and that's something we've been lucky enough to do in partnership with Verizon, Innovative Learning. And so it's kind of a flagship really for what we mean by immersive content.
Hello, I'm Corinne. I work at PBS Kids, and I am the Director of Technology for our Game Squad. What that means is I had all the engineering efforts for our suite of games, which are HTML5, and that's called Spring Roll, is our ecosystem, and then our Games app. And right now we have 379 games on .org and 266 on the Games app. So it is a very large project, and we have a kind of small team. So
Lean and mean, that's what we love, Corinne, in this business. So clearly you are all cultural influencers. You are dedicated to driving social change. One of the things I think we should start at the core, we're talking about Pixel Playtime. At its core, how do you define impact, and by what factors do you measure success? And Corinne, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I have an engineering background, so I feel like you expect me to say like metrics and analytics, and like that's definitely how we measure impact somewhat. Like we definitely count our game plays, game downloads, things like that. But personally, for me, the impact really like is a mix of the analytics and meeting people. Like everywhere I go, whenever I tell people I work at PBS Kids, they're like, oh my gosh, I was a PBS kid. And like the fact that that happens every single day and like at conferences like this, like constantly, that mixed with like seeing how many game downloads we have and how many kids are playing or like are learning analytics, like the combination is really where I find the impact and like see it.
Yeah, the mix of quant and qual, right, really gives you the full story.
Yeah.
What about you, Phil?
It was really interesting in a panel I was just on, just prior to this, assessment came up. Because that's the thing, you know, we're assessing it against Common Core, NGSS, things like that. And yeah, that's important. For us, very much more important or as important is we talk a lot about engagement. So content like this engages. But that's just the very, very first step. What we're looking for is two other things. We're looking for it to create a sense that the person encountering the content, the student, wants to invest themselves and go beyond engagement. And from investment, the real goal for us is to create affinity. So if you're looking at something and you're really, you say you're looking at some historical content, you're properly immersed in it, it's entertaining you, you feel you're there, and then when that's finished, you think, I need to know everything about this. And it's not just about hitting a mark, it's not just about being assessed, it's about a love of learning and a love of what you've just encountered. That's really powerful. So affinity, that's the very top level for us. And if we can't always do that, but if we can do that, and it's just for a few students, and it's a scale all along the way, then I think we're doing something that's worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very important note that you made there, the acute connection between assessment, investment, and passion.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Mel, what about you?
I guess to answer your first question of like, how do I define impact?
Yes.
I think we often think about the change that happens on the player, but I also want to think about the change that happens with our development teams, with our partners, and with the community around the player. So that's one of the things that we think about. You know, obviously we're very focused on the child, just like Mr. Rogers was originally, but also the community and the family around the child. And the way we assess, certainly, like Corinne said, certainly metrics are one way. And ideally, if we had all the budget in the world, I would also say independent research assessment would be fantastic. But really, it comes down to the anecdotal experiences. You know, we do a lot of playtesting in the community, and we constantly get letters from parents saying things like, this game helped my child potty train. And, you know, that's such an important developmental milestone for kids, and to hear parents call that out. And then we've done research with kids, coming back who grew up with our shows and hearing their voices, the strategy songs that stuck with them. Like, that's also really impactful to us. And, you know, that shows that we're making a good impact on the community.
That's right, making a difference.
Yeah.
Great. Tiffany?
I think what's so great about being on this panel is that we represent such varied roles and bring with us, you know, different expertise. And as part of that, we all have different definitions of impact. And for me, something that comes to mind when I think of the impact is, you might think of, you know, something that happens at the end or final stage of the production phase. But I think that's true, and it's like a yes and kind of thing. Impact can also happen throughout the design phase. So when I think of that as impact, it's, if you're designing an app for multilingual learners, are you including educators that serve children from diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds? Are you including families from those communities as part of the idea generation, brainstorming, testing, and refinement of that?
That's a very important note. We're actually going to get back to that, but one of the things I want to underscore that you acknowledged here is the importance of not just thinking about the end goal, but the means to that end. What does that journey look like and the holistic effort to get there? I want to go back to something you said, Mel. Thinking about this panel overall, we know that gaming is big business. According to a 2024 report by the Entertainment Software Association, 190.6 million Americans between the ages of 5 and 90 years old play video games. So you all have a big responsibility and opportunity to reach millions of people, not to mention that some of you are reaching audiences that are even younger than the age of 5. Mel, you talked about some of the more positive aspects, the notes that you're getting from parents talking about helping their kids potty train, talk about the impact of songs and the ability of music to teach. I wonder if each of you can speak about some of the barriers you faced in innovating for impact. And why don't we start with you?
Oh, yeah. So I think everyone who has a small child or has been around a small child has heard the phrase screen time as a major concern. And of course, it's something we talk about a lot, with our own children and with the children that we serve. I think it is really difficult to balance the time away from the screen and what's important, what are you getting out of the screen? And I guess one of the things that we try to do is try to educate people about the screen as a tool that you can use, and you can use it together with your child. And I think thinking about the quality of the content on there, much like when Mr. Rogers, went to Congress, right, and made the impassioned plea that, hey, kids are watching TV and TV is crap. Probably not the words he used. But, he said that, he saw people demeaning each other on television. And, I think we have a responsibility when we make these games to make sure that we're making quality content and also encouraging people to use the tools responsibly. That means maybe doing co-play with your child. And I think the games can help assist with that. So things like having natural stopping points in your games, so that kids aren't encouraged to continue to play forever. And those are just some of the things, some of the challenges that we think about.
No, that's great. In the prior panel with Jesse Schell and his team, they did mention Mr. Rogers and his impassioned plea. So I think the idea of using technology as a tool for good is something that we all can get behind, but certainly there are various factors we need to consider when doing that. Tiffany, what about you? What barriers are you facing when innovating for impact?
I think for our team, when we engage in the design work, we're partnering with the preschool educators, the families, as well as curriculum and media game developers. And so when you bring, this group together, you all might be talking different languages at the beginning. And so it's important to, at the start of your project, allocate time for trust and relationship building, so you all have a chance to get to know one another. And then together, you can co-create your shared vision of how you want your app development process to go. And so I think that can be a barrier, is when you have all these multiple perspectives, how do you balance all the different viewpoints?
Yeah, great. Yeah, that balance is certainly key. And Corinne, with PBS, you are bringing forth a number of partners and IP. So are there particular barriers you face in doing that?
Not with the partners specifically, but with the audience, yes, in general. It's very difficult. Our target audience is 2 to 8. And the first barrier that I could think of with that is safety concerns. We try to stay COPPA compliant. We don't collect any identifiable information. We don't have logins. Another thing that's a barrier is their literal age. Most of them can't read. So how do you build a game or an app where a child can navigate and they don't know how to read exit when they want to exit a game? So we do a lot of rapid iteration with our team, a lot of demoing and with our design team. And then another thing that is a barrier is, so we're free and nonprofit. So that means that most of our audience is in a lower socioeconomic level. So we have to make sure that our app and our games are going to run on devices that are not the newest iPhone or the newest Pixel, that are hand-me-downs. And we have to make sure that games can be played offline. And that the kids that have the hand-me-down iPhone are going to get the same experience as the kids that have the brand new one. So those are the main 3 barriers that we struggle with on a daily basis.
Sure. Thank you for sharing. Phil?
I think one of the barriers for us, I'm talking about schools now, really, is perception. It's getting past that perception that playing and games don't really belong all the time in the classroom. I've had internal meetings where people have said, "Oh, we were going to do something a bit more serious than this," and we have lots of phrases and lots of principles in our team. One of them is pedagogy first, technology second. It's like, how do you get through that doorway? How do you make sure that pedagogy leads? And it's so important. And with the other thing we have is that immersion, which is we create immersive content, is an amplifier of things. So that's really powerful. What teacher doesn't want to amplify learning, the pace of the learning and the depth of the learning? So we need to make those arguments. So for that, we need to be serious. I'm a serious educator, but I make games. Our team makes games. So it's so important that we bring that messaging with us. Play is such a powerful, positive thing across all ages. But we put it with pre-K, kindergarten. We don't say it's right across the board, including the teacher. You've got to have that as well. The other one is access and devices. Our head of development is here as well, and his sleepless nights over making sure that it runs on that Chromebook.
Yeah.
That otherwise is going to melt and turn into a blob of plastic if you actually do run the software. So it's things like that. Those are the things we're looking at. It's always making a ramp so that if you can access some meaningful content, some meaningful play, and some meaningful outcomes, regardless of what you've got in front of you.
Yes, Phil. This is why you're on the superhero squad of Play with Purpose. Yes. I want to double click into that for a minute, though, because having worked at Sesame Street, having worked at Nickelodeon, I know that a lot of factors for schools are certainly brand trust, but also this notion of there are sometimes moments where there's a perception that if there's a commercial IP associated with an educational game, it's somehow less educational. Can you speak to that?
Oh, yeah. This is a safe space, right?
Yes.
So
We're among friends.
Yeah, okay. It's not being recorded, is it? No, okay. So Sesame Street is a great example. We work with Sesame Street. We work with Minecraft. We work with lots of brands. Bringing those brands into the classroom first of all, it's a huge responsibility. There's a huge weight. I'm from the UK. You might have noticed. I'm from the UK. I grew up with Sesame Street with my teacher going, it's not Z, it's Z. It's not brought to you by the letter Z, it's brought to you by the letter Z. But it's a big deal. How do you leverage that into the classroom? How do you create experiences that can bring those values along with it? It's such a challenge. And it's a lot easier to not actually have that IP and do something that frees you up. But at the same time, it's about understanding what happens when children encounter the power of that trigger in front of them. And when they do, our responsibility is to find that one thing, that I talk a lot about doorways and gateways. I think we're all about opening little gateways, so there's a truck behind me that's got 200,000 learning assets. But if I can use Oscar to open up a little doorway, then the truck can unload all that content through that gateway. And that's what it's about with it. So it's a real double-edged sword, but it takes probably, I think, twice, 3 times, 4 times as much planning and design to make that IP work for you.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. One of the through lines I hear in everything that you all have stated is this idea and importance of collaboration, right? Whether you're collaborating with children, collaborating with educational partners, collaborating with each other. Thinking about partnerships, and this is something that Susanna Polk and I have talked about quite a bit, personally as well as professionally. We know that there is such power in partnerships. A study by McKinsey noted that when businesses collaborate to expand their consumer base, they increase their revenue. Right? Their average revenue. So I want to dive into partnerships for a bit and get your perspective on particularly 3 pillars. How do you know when to partner? Who do you decide to partner with? And when do you know it is the right time to partner? And I see all of you nodding. Tiffany and Phil, why don't we start with you, given the work that you all have done?
Sure. I think I mentioned earlier too, a lot of our design work involves multiple stakeholder groups. So the media and game designers, curriculum developers, preschool educators, and families. And so, it's important when you engage in this design process to involve all of those people early and often throughout the process. And as part of that too, you have to, like I mentioned earlier, establish the relationship, build trust so that you have a safe space so everybody has an opportunity to have their voice heard. You include the families and educators and children for the particular groups that you're intending to create the app for. So are you able to create an app that reflects their cultural and linguistic backgrounds? So I think that's an important part of the collaboration work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and with Verizon Innovative Learning, Digital Promise, the thing that it was just a meeting of minds, I think. It was that the right understanding was there. Another thing I talk about a lot, which I think is a luxury for educators these days, is to have an understanding of the philosophy of education before you get to the mechanics of education. And I think we shared a philosophy of education and the promise and what it was all about and what we could do. And so therefore, you couple that with innovation, an understanding of how learning happens, an understanding of the desire for it to be free, which is such a big deal. It's such a pleasure to work on something where you know that you're not going to hit a paywall at some point. It's all going to be there, and that you can experience that. Because in our sector, it's important to innovate, but it's important to innovate with all of the understanding that I think we found that shared understanding together. And that creates capacity in educators to seek out more of what it is we all do. It's such a big deal. And so for me, it was that shared philosophy that said, this is right, this is the right path to go.
Right, shared philosophy, knowing when there is the right fit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of the right fit, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood and PBS Kids. Personally, I love the game Nature Walk. I played it and I ran into my daughter's room and I was like, let's go on a nature walk, right? I mean, I was so inspired by it. But I think both from a theoretical as well as from a practical perspective, you both can speak to what partnership looks like. And so I'd love to hear from you both.
Yeah. Okay. So actually earlier this year, we partnered together for a New Neighbors, New Games effort where we put out RFPs for a new game for Alma's Way and for Daniel Tiger. And I think Melanie and I both talked. There was a webinar where we had a bunch of developers that potentially could develop a new game for us, come and learn about how to build a game within our Spring Roll ecosystem. I gave a talk on how to do that. And that's really how we find new people to partner with. We kind of put RFP out there and see who comes to us, and make sure that they have all the information they need in order to, think of a game that works along well with our IPs. And it's very rewarding. So all of the games that we have, like the 300 so games, have all been built by dev shops that are using the tools that my team builds. So we're not actually building the games. We're partnering with these dev shops, with Fred Rogers, with Sesame, to get all these games built. So there's a lot of collaboration. And the most important thing with that for me is making sure that it's accessible from end to end, making sure that the developers know how to use the tools, how from the beginning before they even submit a proposal to at the very end, the kids know how to play with it too. So there's definitely a lot of collaboration from that very long end-to-end process. But yeah, and so if you want to talk a little more about the New Neighbors.
Yeah, I'll definitely speak to New Neighbors, New Games. So our goal at Fred Rogers was to diversify who is making our games. So we don't actually develop the games in-house. We work with development partners. We work with educational advisors. We work with PBS. And we bring it all together as the producers. And we wanted to, reach new developers, and we wanted to make this process better and easier for the developers to get in, because we think it's important to have all this public media. But if people don't know they can do it, and if the process is hard, then we won't hear those other voices in public media. And so we went out and we contacted groups that we hadn't reached out to before. We did post on LinkedIn, but we didn't just post on LinkedIn. We went to like IGDA subgroups and reached out to them. We talked to indie games business. We reached out to Global Game Jam. And we talked to a lot of people and we're like, hey, we're doing this thing. It's an open RFP. Anyone, even individual developers can apply, right? So please apply, come to these webinars. And we had 191 people sign up for the webinars, and then 122, I think, people actually attend the webinars. And then we had 75 submissions for On This Way and 85 submissions, these are from companies, right, for Daniel Tiger. So that was a large number of people very interested and invested in it. And that allowed us to eliminate the process to those people, all those people who applied, but then also to look at what is new, what is innovative, what are people thinking about making for children, and then to pick from them 2 new developers, one for On This Way and one for Daniel Tiger, that we now are working on with them. So that was a really great experience. And we hope to hear more voices. I don't want to think of developers as competition. Like, we're all in this together. We're all making these things. We all want to make really good quality content for children. And so the more educated we can be and the easier we can make that process, the more great quality content.
Absolutely. And congratulations to you for sourcing from so many diverse companies and people. I think that's absolutely remarkable. When you were talking before, Corinne, about partnering with various companies to bring their content to the PBS Kids platform, one of the questions that was top of mind for me is, we're amongst friends, just a reminder. You don't have to say any names, but has there ever been a moment in which you've received something that isn't aligned with the impact you hope to achieve? And if so, how do you manage that?
I can't say that it happens frequently. Most of the time, but by the point they've gotten to the coding, like all of the content has been kind of like hashed out. So like if somebody delivers a pull request to me and it's not aligned with our standards, we have a bunch of like automated checks that make sure that, it's going in, and then we actually go through and read the code as well and make sure that it's aligning with like our standards that way and our content standards. So it doesn't necessarily happen too often with what I see, but I do have like a few checks to make sure, just in case. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think aligning with technology as well as aligning with the needs of kids is perhaps more important than ever. Mel, thinking about mental health in particular and the fact that it's such a part of the national discourse, we have done some research in Nickelodeon with kids 6 to 11 years old and found that they think it's more important to care for their physical health than their mental health. I know that you have been really passionate about making sure that kids are having their social and emotional growth fostered through games, both through mobile games as well as the web games that you are responsible for. What particular nuances do you look to leverage, given the capabilities of different platforms, as you seek to foster kids' social and emotional learning?
Yeah, so there's a few things. I mean, like you said, my colleague said, access. So, I think it's so important that many kids, all kids, ideally, right, can access that social emotional learning content. We've worked with our educational advisors. We believe in the content. And so getting it out in front of them and having it be something they can use is really important to us. I've actually been spending a lot of the past year working on like sort of accessibility tools for that. So things like creating all our games in Spanish, or we have closed caption for our games. And I know I said that I make games for 3-year-olds, and 3-year-olds can't read, as was stated, but their families do, and older kids also play as well. And so it's very important for us to have those closed captions. We also have things like keyboard controls so that kids who potentially, I think iPads are very accessible to 3-year-olds, but if you don't, say, have great mobility with your hands, suddenly that tool that is accessible that can reach a lot of people is not accessible to you. And so we looked at that and we're like, okay, well, how can we make this more accessible to them? And so adding things like keyboard controls to your games allows things like adaptive controllers to work with them. And so, I think it's just really important that this content get out to as many children as possible.
Yeah. And I think that aligns with the work that you're doing, Tiffany, because you often speak and are lauded for the ways in which you're bringing forth diverse voices of educators, of kids, families, game designers. When you are creating content or overseeing that area of content, does each voice have the same level of weight? Because I think when you're bringing forth diverse voices, given the number of content that you're creating, it also requires a level of discernment. So how do you decide where you prioritize feedback from each of the cohorts you're hearing from?
I appreciate this thoughtful question because it's so important, especially when you're incorporating all these different voices. And so, as part of our process, it has been to really understand that everyone brings with them their lived experiences, and each of these members have expertise in different areas. And so where are the opportunities where you can lean into that? So I can speak a little bit about the early science with Nico and Nor, which was co-designed with the educators, families, and WGBH Educational Foundation. And it's a free resource that contains hands-on classroom and home STEM learning experiences, as well as digital apps. And, that's to say that the apps are a complement to the playful hands-on learning that kids can experience at home and at school. And for instance, what we've been able to do when we created the Early Science with Nico and Nor apps to make it accessible for multilingual learners is, we had advisors and families of different dialects help and share their stories of cultural and linguistic diversity. For instance, when we were, going through prototypes of different games, one of the things that came up was, there's different words in Spanish for like lettuce. Mm-hmm. And so, where can you, again, bring in and leverage the funds of knowledge and expertise of the people that are all designing on this interdisciplinary team?
Yeah, great answer. And accessibility continues to be a through line in all of the work that you are doing. I'm looking at you, Corinne, because thinking about the number of games, you mentioned hundreds of games across the PBS Kids games platform that you are managing. How have the shifting priorities or standards with regard to accessibility impacted your production process?
Well, funny you asked that. In February, we launched an accessibility panel and an accessibility plugin to incorporate in all of our games, basically to create some sort of standardization. Because before it was kind of a free-for-all. It was like, oh, Cyberchase wants to do it this way, Daniel wants to do it this way. Now we have a set way, prescriptive way for you to code and deliver accessibility for children. And it's really changed the way our games have operated, basically. If you think about a kid who is 2 and they're getting on an app, they're learning how to navigate a settings panel. They're learning how to exit from a game.
Right.
And having inconsistencies, especially within the same app, can confuse them. So providing them with those standards, as well as the developers with the standards for accessibility, goes a very long way.
Thank you. And Phil, we cannot end this panel without going back to Time Pod Adventures. Real talk, if there was ever a reason for me to want to go back in time and become a kid, it would be to play Time Pod Adventures. You're able to go on a future mission to Mars where you can drill for water. You are able to go back in time and come face to face with a life-size dinosaur, which sounds both terrifying and intriguing. I'm wondering, in the time we have left, can you share what's the greatest lesson you've learned during this creative journey, and what has been the most rewarding part of that process in creating impact for the audience?
I think one of the greatest lessons it reinforced this lesson for me, was don't patronize users, don't patronize the young people that use content like this. Give them the AAA+ production values that they deserve. And if you do, they will eat your game. They will take it. Yes. They will involve themselves. And for us, it was the power of narrative. if you invite, and this was for teachers too, another gateway I'm talking about. If you open the gateway, the teacher wants to, one of the greatest comments we ever had was a teacher that said, "This makes me want to teach." Wow. And you know you've done something when they're like eager to go into the classroom, mess with all that tech, which messes. If you're a teacher in the audience, you know what hassle that is. It's like, no, I'm prepared to go through that pain because I want to go to Mars in 2072 to visit Alpha Colony because apparently their water supplies have gone. What are we going to do? And you've got children that are wrestling with spreadsheets all through a life-scale augmented reality app, and they're trying to solve it. They're trying to save lives. They're trying to sort this out, and it's like, what do you? And another great comment we got: "I love days like this when we don't do any work." And you think, and the teacher's going, you know, they're like, "Have you seen her? She's got a spreadsheet open and she's doing this." And I think they're on an adventure. They're on an adventure, understanding that this is immersion. It's not goggles. It's not anything. It's not tech. It's adventure. It's being there. It's being part of it. And it's a vehicle. And it's understanding that. We love our job because we take people on adventures. And that's one of the great things we've been able to do with Verizon Innovative Learning and Digital Promise is to bring content like this for free. And now we're bringing it to Chromebook and everything else and broadening out. We're creating our TimePod connected universe, you know? There you go, Marvel. You heard it here first. The TCU is now a thing. It is because it's powerful, and teachers that know it. I'm sorry, I might go on a bit here, but you mentioned before about about well-being as well. It's like we give them space. We give you space to go and explore and to be, because immersion is so powerful. It does that to you. And when you can do that, you can take you away for a brief moment. And in that brief moment, you can be somewhere else. And Hannah is an expert here in doing things with that and guiding teachers in a way that says, okay, we're going to talk about STEM here. But did you know you could go and meditate there? Yeah. Did you know you could go and be somewhere else? Because once that student stepped through that doorway, another doorway, then you can do something else with it as well as just go and learn that to that standard.
Wow. Well, thank you and your team for the many doorways and pathways that you're creating for children, educators, adults everywhere. Really appreciate that. We are in our rapid fire round. And so as we begin to tie things up, I have a couple of questions for all of you. One is, we've heard quite a bit about what you're doing right now. I challenge you to think future forward and answer the following question. What is one thing that is on your wish list, your product wish list for the future? Now, Tiffany, we'll start with you and just go on down.
I think just continuing to explore how we could leverage technology, especially emerging tech, in the early learning space, and understand what are the best features of that tech for young multilingual learners.
I guess go down the line. I will piggyback on you. I think we're definitely very interested in emerging tech and how can we use it ethically and responsibly, because it's there. We know AI is a big topic. We know it's there. And so I think, I'd love, my beautiful dream is there's an answer that is using that tech and that's ethical and safe for children, because it's there.
Beautiful.
I would say that what we do as creators, educators, is taken seriously and is considered to be the norm. It's normal to go into a classroom, to play, to learn, to immerse. And that's just like, that's what we do.
So, for me, it was pretty easy to think about because we are diving into a redesign right now of our app, of .org and everything. So my dream is to have like an even better version of our app, which I am confident we can do. So.
Something tells me with your leadership, it will definitely happen. The second question is, looking out at the audience and thinking about the power of this Games for Change community. We know that it's a community that is not only about action, but also about allyship. What is a word that describes what being a part of the Games for Change community has meant for you? And I won't put you on the spot, Tiffany, this time, even though you're closest to me. Why don't we start with you, Mal?
I would say partnership and growth. That's 2 words, but I think that this community is so giving, right? That we everyone is really in it and invested to help one another and to grow the community. And so I think just being part of it, hearing people, enables us to create better things, to go back and create new and better things.
So,
Corinne?
motivational or motivating is my word. I'm like so motivated by all the people that I've met here this week and like will continue to meet. And I know that like we're all doing great things. And like, that's just so cool to be in a room full of like creators that are making positive change, you know, but motivational, sure.
Great. And Tiffany?
I think for me, especially since this is my first Games for Change, it has been about connection and just within the first half of this day, just meeting new individuals and getting to know one another and each other's work.
Great.
And for me, this is my first Games for Change, and it's been quite an experience. And so I think validation, you get to meet so many different people, and we're all testing what we do against each other, and we get we're all nodding at each other, and that sense of validation is really strong.
Wonderful. Wow. All great words. And we have a couple of minutes left. I don't know if there are any burning questions from the audience, but if so, please come to the microphone. Tell us who you are and what your question is.
Hi. Hello. Hello. My name is Anita Suman, so I'm occupational therapist, so I'm loving the skill development. I was just wondering, but all products and the apps and all the games that first month crowd. And as someone who uses these games with like some of my clients, I love learning about what skills. Well, I have used reading skills to now and like when open myself.
I could hear you. Yes.
We can hear you.
I love the concept of that you brought up about Mars and having kids go and figure out that I guess executive C skills that how to solve.
Yep.
You know, with like the various games I saw that
I play. Oh, thank you. That I've used with like my clients. There's a lot of visual perceptual skills that are being addressed. Do you guys list or have a database of these are the games that hit these X amount of skills or anything like that? Because I feel like there's a lot of therapists who I spend hours just searching for apps because kids today, every day are being born and being introduced with more technology more than ever. So it behooves all of us to be thinking about tech and video games and apps in general as a way to build and bridge that gap with educational learning. But do you guys have anything like that, like a database?
Yeah.
I can start off. We have a parent site that accompanies our kids.org and our games app, and everything has curriculum. There's curriculum behind every single game, every single show. So if you go to our parent site, you can see like, oh, I want to teach my kid about computational thinking, or like something else. There's a whole drop down, and you can go through there. We also have PBS Learning Media, which is focused more on adults, but that also helps you with like curriculum for older like kids above the PBS Kids age, and adults. So there's definitely resources that tell you exactly what you should be learning from our materials. I think I was talking from a therapeutic perspective, like when we're doing all these first concepts, or when a kid comes to therapy and they're figuring out shapes or identification or visual discrimination and visual attention. Is there something like that? Because I know a lot of us occupational therapists and speech therapists and physical therapists, we love using these apps for those reasons. I was just wondering about
I think it's a really good question, because we think about all of those things when we're designing what we do, but we don't necessarily always contextualize it in a way that's useful to people like you and probably other people with different use cases. So I think it's on us to start thinking about that in different ways. I could, we could all probably point you to a website where you can get our stuff and it's free, and, Verizon Innovative Learning, go there and you can access it. But it's not going to be contextualized, I don't think, in the way that is immediately meaningful to you, and we're asking you to do far more interpretation then perhaps then you should do. So I think it's a good problem on us to start thinking about.
I would love to talk to you guys sometime after, but thank you so much for answering. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your question. I think it nicely bridges the importance of content, context, and connection. And speaking of connection, we are at time for our panel, but we do have a slide up that tells you how to contact any of us. I want to thank the panelists for your expertise, for your time, for your passion, for the purpose with which you drive your lives every single day. You're truly outstanding. Thank you. Thank you to the audience for being here. Please join me in giving our panelists a warm round of applause.
Hey.